Alright, let's get going on lesson 46, complex roots and factoring over the complex numbers. Well, this first problem, it says write the quadratic equation with a lead coefficient of 1 whose roots are 1 plus 2y and 1 minus 2y. Now when it talks about roots, it just means solutions to a quadratic equation. Like if we had the roots of a quadratic equation where x equals 2 and x equals 6, and I ask you to write a quadratic equation with those roots, remember if we're going backwards we would just take and we would subtract them both from x and set it equal to 0, and then we would FOIL it and we would get our equation. So the roots to this equation are 2 and 6. You can see we usually work from this way to the answer, and we learned also that we can work from the answer to the equation. So all we're going to do with this one is we have complex roots. Remember, a complex number can be written in the form a plus bi, and any number can be written as a complex number by just adding 0i to it. So we're going to write a quadratic equation and we're given the roots. Complex number roots always come in conjugate pairs. If we have 1 plus 2i, we're also going to have 1 minus 2i, and that'll come in, we'll be using this later on in the book. So for right now, let's just write our quadratic equation. So we're just going to do exactly what we did here. We're going to have x minus 1 plus 2i times x minus 1 minus 2i. We're just working our way backwards. Let's distribute it. X minus 1 minus 2i times the quantity x minus 1 plus 2i. And then you have to multiply this all out. We're going to take x times all three of these, negative 1 times all three of these, negative 2i times all three of these. Here we go. So we're going to get x squared minus x plus 2xi minus 1 times all those, minus x plus 1 minus 2i, and then finally negative 2ix plus 2i minus 4i squared. And fortunately the 2i plus 2xi crosses out with the negative 2xi, the negative 2i and the positive 2i. This is negative 1, so this whole thing is going to be plus 4, and we just put it all together. X squared minus x is minus 2x plus 1 plus 4 is 5 equals 0, and we have our quadratic equation. If we put this in the quadratic formula, it's not factorable over the real numbers, we're going to get our answers as 1 plus 2i and 1 minus 2i. Now let's just work backwards. We'll just do one example of this. It says factor over the set of complex numbers. Well, we could try to factor it, but it doesn't factor. So, and it tells us it's complex number, so we know we're going to need to use a quadratic formula. Whenever you factor these, the first thing you have to do is factor out, if there's a coefficient in front of the x squared term, you need to factor that out before you start. So we get x squared plus 2x plus 4. And we'll just say equals 0. Now in order, we have this factor and this factor. So in order to do, we're going to factor this factor, we're going to use a quadratic formula. So we would say x equals negative b, so it would be negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so it's 4, minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. And if we simplify that, we get negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 12 all over 2, and we just keep simplifying it. Negative 2 plus or minus, it's 4 times 3, so we can take out the square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 3i, because it's negative, all over 2. And finally, the 2's all cross out, so we get negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 3i. And you can see how it's in a conjugate pair. We have negative 1 plus the square root of 3i and negative 1 minus the square root of 3i. Your solutions, if it's a complex number, it's always going to occur as a conjugate pair. Remember, conjugate, you just change this middle sign. So they want to know, they want us to factor it. So we're going to have our 2 as our one factor. We factor that out right away. So we're going to have x minus -1 plus the square root of 3i. And then we're going to also have x minus -1 minus the square root of 3i. And then we're just going to multiply all that out, and we'll have our factors. So we get 2, or we're just going to distribute inside. X plus 1 minus the square root of 3i. And the other factor is x plus 1 plus the square root of 3i. And this is what all they want. They just wanted the factors. So this is your final answer, is the factors. So that's it for lesson 46.